In this video, we are going to examine the ancient Thracians. The Thracians resided in an area that constitutes modern-day Bulgaria, northern Greece, and Turkey. Ancient Greek mythology provides them with a mythical ancestor, Thrax, the son of the war god Ares. Ares himself was believed to have been born in Thrace. The Thracians were considered to be warlike, which probably explains why the Greeks connected them to the god Ares. In fact, Homer, in the book of Odyssey, relates that Ares retreated back to Thrace after his love affair with Aphrodite was exposed. The earliest writing that mentions the Thracians is found in the Iliad, where they are described as allies of the Trojans in the Trojan War against the Greeks. According to Homer, the Thracian king Rhesus supported the Trojans. However, he arrived late to the battle because his kingdom was attacked by the Scythians, right after he received the news that the Greeks had attacked Troy. According to the Iliad, Rhesus was killed in a nighttime raid launched by the Greeks. Diomedes and Odysseus killed Rhesus in his tent, and then stole his prized horses. Similar to other ancient civilizations, most of the accounts of the Thracians are provided to us from Greek and Roman sources. The Greeks and Romans considered the Thracians to be mere bloodthirsty barbarians. The main reason for this was a lack of cities, but another problem was geography, especially since they resided far in the north. Throughout most of their history, the Thracians were deeply divided. There were literally dozens of separate tribes, who often spent most of their time fighting each other. One of the most powerful Thracian tribes were the Odrysians, who you can see on the map right here. For a period of time, several Thracian tribes united to form a kingdom, but as I mentioned before, they never really unified into a large empire. Another problem was that Thrace was a natural invasion point to the east and west. Persians, Greeks, Scythians, Macedonians, and Romans, and many others would all fight for control of the region. Herodotus writes, quote, "The Thracians are the most powerful people in the world, except, of course, the Indians. And if they had one head, or were agreed among themselves, it is my belief that their match could not be found anywhere, and that they would very far surpass all other nations. But such union is impossible for them, and there are no means of ever bringing it about. Herein, therefore, consists their weakness." End quote. In terms of warfare, the Thracians often fought as light infantry, using javelins and other long-range weapons. They also did not shy away from close-quarters combat. For short-range encounters, they used weapons such as axes and swords. During ancient times, they proved to be excellent mercenaries, owing to their toughness in battle. The Athenians, Spartans, Macedonians, and even the Romans recruited the Thracians as mercenaries. The Macedonians in particular utilized the Thracian horse and infantry in their army. The Thracians also excelled as miners and goldsmiths. You can see here one of these artifacts that has been recovered, and it shows a high degree of skill in metalworking. Herodotus also wrote about the gods worshipped by the Thracians. Quote, "The gods which they worship are but three, Mars, Bacchus, and Dion." End quote. Bacchus is interesting because the Thracians were known for producing excellent wine. Homer indicates many of their festivals involved the consumption of wine, and even more interestingly, they drank their wine straight. This was different than the Greeks, who often diluted their wine with water. Many ancient historians describe the Thracians as almost universally having red hair. Modern historians mostly discount this, and have concluded that the Thracians and many other groups of people often had different physical characteristics from those described by ancient sources. Okay, let's take a look at the timeline now. Some early Neolithic societies have been identified in the region dating back to 6500 BC. Many of these groups thrived on agriculture. And as I mentioned, Homer indicates the Thracians were participants in the Trojan War. Whether there is any historical reality behind the Trojan War remains open to debate. Many scholars believe that there is at least a historical basis to the story, though many parts were likely embellished over the ages. Beginning in the 8th century BC, the Greeks began to set up colonies throughout the Mediterranean. The first Greek colonies in Thrace were also founded in the 8th century BC, mainly on the Black Sea. This began to introduce Hellenic culture to the region, especially on the coastlines. A major event occurred in 513 BC, when the Persians under Darius crossed the Bosphorus and invaded Thrace. Most of the Thracians submitted without a fight. Given their reputation in battle, many Thracians were incorporated into the Persian army. After subjugating the Thracians, Darius invaded Scythia. This campaign, however, resulted in more of a stalemate, as Darius retreated back to Thrace. The Persians placed Thrace, along with Macedonia, in the Scudra province. This occurred just a few decades before Persia's conflict with Greece. During the Persian Wars, contacts between the Thracians and classical Greece intensified. After the Persian War ended, the Athenians and the Delian League began to set up trading colonies in Thrace. Thus, the coastlines of Thrace began a gradual process of Hellenization. However, tribes in the interior retained their independence. The Odrysian state was the first Thracian kingdom that acquired power in the region. They were able to unify many of the Thracian tribes under a single king. This likely occurred in the 470s BC, after the Persian defeat in Greece. Although the Odrysians maintained their kingdom, their political influence began to weaken, especially after the Macedonians invaded in 353 BC. Philip succeeded in conquering the southern portion of Thrace. The Odrysian Kingdom effectively became a vassal state of Macedon, and were expected to pay taxes to their new ruler. After Philip's death, the administration of Thrace was passed on to Alexander the Great. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, control of Thrace was passed on to his successors. However, during this period, some Thracian tribes were able to retain some independence. During the Macedonian Wars, Thrace was dragged into the conflict between Rome and a weakened Macedon. This benefited many of the tribes in Thrace, as they were able to achieve an even greater degree of independence. But this was short-lived, as the Romans decisively defeated the Macedonians at the Battle of Pydna in 168 BC. Rome soon took possession of Macedonia, and with that, control of Thrace passed to Rome. What followed were several brutal revolts by the Macedonians and Thracians, but eventually both states were forced to submit to Roman authority. Thrace's status was that of a client kingdom in the Roman Republic. This situation lasted until 46 AD, when the Romans finally converted Thrace into a fully fledged Roman province. You can also see some of the other nearby Roman provinces, Macedonia and Illyria. During the time of the Roman Empire, many Thracians, especially members of the aristocracy, were granted the right of Roman citizenship. This had the effect of further assimilating the Thracians into the Greco-Roman culture, and this is also where Thracian culture likely began to disappear. Today it is believed the Bulgarians are the descendants of the Thracians.